Hi, my name is Ainsley. Today I wanted to talk about the impact of migration on child development. I wanted to specifically talk about the movement from a underdeveloped nation to a developed nation. Some current examples would be the Syrian refugee crisis or the movement from migrants such as the caravan from Latin America to the United States. I wanted to start with a quote from UNICEF. It says, "The true measure of a nation's standing is how well it attends to its children. Their health and safety, their material security, their education and socialization, and their sense of being loved, valued, and included in the families and societies that they're born into." Historically, there hasn't been a lot of studies academically on child impact when it comes to migration. Part of the reason it might have been overlooked is going to be the flow and trends of migration. So the United Nations estimates that in about 1980, they had around 100 million migrants. That number has skyrocketed to 258 million by 2017. That's a huge difference. And there have also been several wars, crises, violence increasing in certain nations that have moved to the rapid movement of migrants. So first of all, education, when it comes to migrant families and children, the educational achievement tends to be lower. This can be explained by several factors, one of which is language barriers. When you have several children moving into a city or a country, say the Syrian refugee crisis, for example, sometimes there have been hundreds of thousands moving in at one time, and this leads to an educational segregation. These countries are typically not on par with developed nations when it comes to their education systems, and so these children are going to be placed together with common language, and they're going to be separated from the children of the nation that they've moved into. This continues a cycle that we'll be looking at of social isolation, racism. This racism, we tend to think impacts adults specifically, but when it comes to education, language barriers, things like that, children, when they're isolated from other children, they don't learn the way that they're supposed to. Language is harder to pick up on. Learning tools are harder to pick up on when you're just spending time by yourself or spending time with the people from the same country that you've been in. It's harder to pick up on a new nation's education systems. Parents can also struggle with this. So if a parent is struggling to learn the language of a country, it makes it harder to get a job, which can lead to lack of material resources for a family. And this can have long-term and lasting effects on a child's psychological, mental health. If a child does not have adequate food, shelter, clothing, material resources, things they need for school, simple things like hygiene products, it can have severe lasting impacts into adulthood or beyond. Psychologically, parents of migrant families can be severely impacted by things like stress, anxiety, depression, and times of trauma or crisis leaving a country, especially in a crisis movement, can lead to bringing to the forefront things of like psychological disorders. When a parent has mental health issues, it can have severe and lasting impacts on a child. And children are left particularly vulnerable, especially migrant children, to the mental health of their parents. Another developmental impact is going to come from health outcomes. Generally speaking, in developed nations, the health outcomes tend to be better for migrant families. There's better facilities, doctors, research centers, for illnesses, surgeries, those kinds of things. It's better in a developed nation. However, they tend to be much more expensive as well. And sometimes migrant families, especially when they're undocumented, they don't have access to health care. They don't have assistance programs. They don't get the health care that they need. Another thing that's extremely important is vaccines. When you're coming from a nation where certain illnesses have not been introduced, or you've been not vaccinated to things like polio, measles, mumps, Those kinds of things on young children, if you're not given a vaccine in a timely manner, can not only affect large groups of migrant families at a time, but also children who are underage just living in a developed nation as well, like babies, elderly. Families also may not seek medical attention in times of crisis when they're undocumented because of things like deportation. In the United States, we have a program called ICE. Those are immigration enforcement officers. They can show up to a hospital if you go and seek medical attention. So many families and countries will not seek medical attention because of fear of deportation. Lastly, a big fear is going to be trafficking. Children, especially in migrant families, especially undocumented families, are typically left alone by one or more parent who are needing to leave and go find work. These children are not, usually of a legal age to be able to take care of themselves, so they're left extremely vulnerable to things like abduction, assault, and trafficking can be anywhere from labor purposes to sexual purposes. These children can be sold into sex trafficking, sold into labor slavery, and children, again, who are left undocumented are left at an extreme risk for this. So yeah, I hope you take the time to look at how child development can impact or can be impacted by movement from one country to another. And yeah, show some compassion in your heart because it's not easy when you're leaving a crisis. That's all. Thanks.